It's time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, digging into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is Dawn Mann Sanders, and we're going to be discussing her new book, When Your World Ends: God's Creative Process for Rebuilding a Life. Dawn, it is truly an honor. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me, Sean. I'm really happy and honored to be here.
Well, truly my pleasure. I'm going to try to get rid of this frog in my throat, or I'll just sound kind of funny throughout the whole interview. We'll see where we end up. For those of you who've been watching the podcast recently and Grieve Like a Man, I've been talking a lot about grief as I walk out my own grief journey. I was pleasantly surprised to see Dawn's book in InterVarsity Press's fall lineup. And so that's why we're on the show today to have a discussion about that. Before we get into the book, though, Don, I'd love to hear a bit of the Dawn Mann Sanders origin story, superpowers, special abilities, things we have to know to make you memorable. Share a bit of that with us now.
Okay, well, I'm a Bible teacher, author, and associate minister at the First Baptist Church of Glenarden International in Glenarden, Maryland, under the leadership of John K. Jenkins Sr. There, I lead the sermon based small groups ministry, and I also have a grief journey of my own, which is what has led to my book. I met and married my husband, and we decided to spend a year together, just the two of us, before trying to expand our family, which we did. Spend the year alone before trying. And during that next year, I had two miscarriages, followed by the death of my husband, all within the span of 8 months. Uh, that took me on my grief journey, as I was just saying. And during my grief journey, I found a few books on grief and grieving. I didn't find a whole lot on rebuilding. And so when God led me to the creation story and showed me that that's where he created the first two lives, um, I saw there too that there's a path to rebuilding. And that's where the um, God's creative process, the creation story, is taken from.
Well, I can only imagine the grief of two miscarriages and losing a spouse within such a small time frame. I mean, just any one of those losses is enough, let alone three big losses like that stacked on each other. That is a big burden to carry, to say the least. I think one of the challenges we all face when we are dealing with a loss like this, that initial question we're always going to ask is why. And you kind of open the book talking about a ministry situation where somebody was just, wrestling with like why, why is my person gone? Why God am I even in this situation? I feel like we all are going to end up starting there when we're walking out a journey like this. um, how did you wrestle with kind of that why question? And how has your, I don't know if how has your answer shifted, but obviously on this side of it, from a ministry perspective, you're equipped to be able to help people process that.
Yeah. My journey showed me that eventually I had answers, that God had brought lots of people into my life that had given me answers. Um, some answers like God has a plan, and indeed he does. Um, and just other theological, spiritual based answers. Um, but none of those answers really satisfied. And I came to understand that that's it. That's part of why we continue to ask why, is that there is no satisfying answer for the pain that we're currently going through, right? We can have an understandable answer, right? But rarely, and I shouldn't say there's none, but rarely is there one that is satisfying, that leaves us saying, yay, I'm so happy that for that reason. Um, and so because there was no satisfying answer for me, and I, um, in my introduction, shared that I hazarded a guess with this person that I encountered, that part of the reason that she was still wrestling with why is because she too had encountered some good answers. They just weren't satisfactory answers. That I challenged her, instead of asking why, to lean into her grief. because I came to understand that grief is the expression of our love for someone or something that's no longer there. Just because that person or a thing has gone doesn't mean our feelings go away immediately or at all. I believe I will love my husband and my children for the rest of eternity. And I want to love them for the rest of eternity, right? So I don't want the love to go away. But when that object of our affection is no longer within reach, we grieve. And so I challenged her to lean into that grief, that um, also too by asking why sometimes we are trying to minimize our grief in an effort to lessen it, right? And I didn't want to lessen my love for him. Like I just said, I want to love them for all eternity. And since I wanted to go on loving them, once I realized grief was an expression of that love, I chose to honor it by feeling it and feeling it um, in all of its messiness and painfulness until that feeling changed. Um, and by doing so, I found that when we do lean in, that the Bible says, "Be angry and sin not," and that word anger. I'm going to say in the Hebrew. I know some people are going to say, but it's Ephesians. That's Greek, but Paul's actually quoting Psalms 4:4 in that passage, and so I'm going to say in the Hebrew, it refers to a strong emotion, and so feel your strong emotions, right? Um, and as you feel them, you're able to release the pain of them and you can find yourself experiencing joy. I can now talk about my husband and my children with joy because I do anticipate seeing them again.
And I would say that first part of the book, like the book is worth it just for that. Because I felt like with how you expressed it, you were giving people permission to continue feeling and grieving. Because one of the big challenges I see is, whether it's a circumstance like my wife's journey, where it was a 19-month journey with cancer, and then a memorial service after she went home to heaven, or if it's something where it's a suddenly kind of a situation and it happens. Most people, their grief part of that journey, unless they're close to your family, kind of stops after that memorial service, or they start moving on, or that kind of a thing. And I think there can be a temptation on our part where we feel like just socially we need to lessen our grief and our emotions for other people because they've seemingly moved on. Uh, but at the same time, we have to keep processing and working through it. That's just the journey. I always say time and Jesus are two of your best friends along this path, but I really like that idea of if I loved big, it's no wonder that I'm grieving big. So I really I love that you give us permission to grieve while we need to keep grieving, as opposed to trying to stop too early. As a publishing guy, I'm always kind of curious about the genesis of an idea. Funny that we're going to talk about Genesis, but hey, I wasn't intentional. It's just how it's said. Of how kind of a book got its start. For you, were you looking for something related to grief, or did you just have this aha light bulb moment when you're reading the book of Genesis?
It was definitely the latter where I was having this aha moment. Um, as you may be aware, the beginning of Genesis is in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. When I read that description of the world before God began to create, it resonated with me and the experience that I had following um, the death of my children and my husband. That my life at that time was unproductive, chaotic, empty, and dark. And so I immediately saw that connection between the creation story and my story. But yet, the first three words said in the beginning. And I say yet because I was experiencing an ending. That's why it was dark and empty and barren, is because I was experiencing an end. But in these three words, I felt God was saying, these are signs of the beginning. And so, yeah, it was a aha moment where I went, gosh, this empty, dark, barren, unproductive thing at the beginning. But yet, by the end of the story, Sean, God had blessed his two creations, male and female. He had created them, right? So he created two lives. He had blessed them with power. He had told them to be fruitful and multiply, and he had put them in a position of power. They had entered his rest. And so as I dug deeper into the passage, I asked God, I said, how can I get more of that ending, more of that power in that rest than this unproductive, empty, dark state? And he told me to dig deeper, and I found the 7-step process that I have dubbed God's creative process.
And in terms of like your life journey initially, I'd love to hear a little bit just what kind of breakthroughs did you see once you had that aha moment? And then did you see this initially as something that you would put in a book someday, or did you feel like this was a special download God gave you just for your journey?
Well, as I helped other people, I immediately saw the universal effects. Um, and even as I was digging into the passage, I just really sensed it was rich, right? As I was just in those 2 verses, there was so much just in what I shared just there or in those 2 verses. And then a few verses later, and I didn't even dig into like verses 3 through 25 while we were talking. And so I understood that it was a deep, rich passage, that there was more than meets the eye. It was not just a passage about creating our environment, the world in which we live. It was a passage that we could use to create our new lives after ours had been destroyed.
And I'd love to pull just a little bit more on that thread of, and this could be an example from your own life or something that you've seen as you've ministered to others. But just that order coming out of chaos. And I think anybody who's walked your journey, walked my journey, everything is thrown into chaos. You don't know what's up, down, sideways. It's just a confusing time as you try to move slowly towards the other side of whatever this journey is. Order from chaos. How do you even begin to find structure?
Wow. Yeah. So let's just, like you said, it's a very confusing time. And I immediately um, saw an analogy of a bomb going off in my life, right? Scattering different pieces of my life all around. And me going, how do I put this crazy puzzle back together? And not knowing how immediately, which is part of the reason why I wrote this book, is that I found a lot of books that talked about um, emotionally, intellectually, even some spiritually, about how to move forward, but to be honest, not practically about how to move forward. And that's the area I struggled with the most. And I struggled with it the most as a minister of the gospel. I had experienced God's power. I had even experienced God's power through death and grieving. My father had died, um, 6 years before my husband did. And so I had experienced God's healing through, grieving of my father. Um, I had experienced a divorce. So I had experienced God putting my life back together. But for some reason with this one, right, it just left me feeling as though there was a whole bunch of pieces and not a lot of foundation to lay them on. Um, and so that was the came about with the first step in the process, which is remain connected to God. Um, it can be it's a moment when it's very easy to pull away, where we have those why questions, and when they're not answered satisfactory, to say that God isn't giving us good answers, that God isn't giving us, answers that will allow us to build on. Um, but I found that He did give us, or at least me, answers to build on. Uh, One of the answers that he gave me was that he didn't just love me, that he loves everyone, and that there are people out here who are grieving. There are people out here trying to rebuild. And because of me going through the experience I've gone through, I've been able to see something in this passage that other people haven't seen, that I can now share with these people, that God loves very much, what he has shown me. Um, and so that was actually something that helped me, right? That God doesn't just love me. He loves these other people. And if we don't go through some of these challenging times, that if we don't suffer when other people are suffering, right? There's no one that they can say to themselves, I'm not alone, right? There's no one they can point to and say that. And so when we share our stories like this, we are giving people touchstones where they can point to that and say, I'm not alone. Another thing that I think speaks to what you were saying is, along the path, I felt specific moments where God moved me. right? So like I went to bed in the beginning praying that God would take me to. God made two decisions that day. He didn't just decide to take my husband, he decided to leave me. And so I went to bed every night asking God to take me to. But after several months, I came to understand that his answer, at least for this season, because we all will one day surely die, but at least for this season, the answer was no. And then I had a moment where I was like, you know what? I'm hurting a lot right now, and I don't want to go on hurting. How? I don't know right now how, but I'm going to have to figure out how to not hurt like I'm hurting right now. Because if I'm going to be here and God waking me up this morning tells me that I'm going to be here at least for one more day, that I want to figure out a way to enjoy my time here and not just hurt. So that was one moment where I woke up and I went, okay, God's answer is no. Then there was another moment where I actually felt myself start feeling better. I woke up one day and I said, I told myself the last time I remembered waking up that I didn't want to feel bad. And today I wake up and I find myself not feeling as bad. And I didn't feel perfect or great or as happy as I feel now, but I felt better, right, than I had felt before. Then there was another moment where people actually saw it. It wasn't just something that I was experiencing inside, where I was out and about in amongst my church community, amongst my family, and people were saying to me, Dawn, you look really good. What's going on with you? And it's like I was taking these baby steps, and one step after another was bringing me to along the journey of feeling better. It didn't happen immediately. It didn't happen with one step, but step by step, there were moments where I was like, wow, I am healing. I am feeling better. And some of those moments I didn't recognize on my own. Some of those moments, like the one I just gave you, other people helped me recognize because when they said, Dawn, you're looking really good. What's going on? I was like, yeah, what is going on? Why am I? Why am I looking better? I'm looking better because I'm feeling better. Why am I feeling better? Because I was taking these steps along the journey to move forward. And one step was a teacher, mentor of mine, shared with me. She said, Dawn, you can lay in the bed for 2 days, but on the third day, like Jesus, you have to get up. If all you do is shower, Dawn, and get back in the bed, get that shower and get back in the bed. And Shaun, after a while, I mean, because I did, I took a shower, I got back in the bed. But after a while, I actually said, I think I'm going to go cook some breakfast, and then it was like, oh, you know what? Someone's invited me to go do XYZ. I'm going to go do XYZ. I need to go do some shopping, right? The food is low. So one step at a time, I moved forward through the journey.
Well, and I want to take just a left turn for a moment. You had mentioned you previously lost your father, and I think for many of us, as we're just moving forward in life, the likelihood is we're going to probably lose some grandparents and parents ahead of losing our spouse. And I can say, at least with my journey, I'd experienced a lot of loss when I was younger, and I assumed I knew a lot about grieving. But losing a spouse is wholly different than losing a parent or a grandparent, in terms of your previous experience with grief versus stepping into like losing your husband. What were some of the ways you realized that grief was different? Because again, I was like, yeah, I've done this before, I'm gonna be okay. I was like, oh wow, this is a completely different game I've never played before.
Yeah. You're so right. I believe every loss is different because our feelings for each person um, in our life is different. We're different when we're with those people, and so I believe that um, each loss is felt differently and grieved differently. But you're right. There was something about losing my husband that was infinitely different, and I believe it was different because I had so many of my life goals, so much of my future tied to my spouse, right? Our We expect the natural progression of things is that a parent will go before we do. Um, and God willing, I think that's the prayer of every parent is that they will go before their child. Their child will go on and outlive them. So that's the natural progression of things. Losing a spouse is not unnatural, but we tie our feelings for the future to them in a way we don't tie them to our parents, in a way we don't necessarily tie them to friends, to the way we don't tie them to other situations that are going on in our life. We have set our hearts on walking this journey with ahead with this person. And I think when we go into marriage, at least I can say for myself, that when we get married and we make that proclamation till death do us part, we're thinking about our death, that we're going to love this person until we die. Right? Not that we're going to love this person after they've died. But that's the real reality that we live with, is that unless we go together, someone will be loving the other one after they die.
I think a lot of us just assume the other one's going to check out, or that we'll check out first, and we don't have to worry about or something. It's just weird. Like, is you never want to think about or talk about these kind of things. I feel like it's easier as you get older to have had more of those conversations. But when we're younger and starting out, we all think we're going to live forever. At least that's how we tend to feel. I want to fast forward to a little bit further in the book. You have a chapter where you're talking about creating space to breathe and a source of water. But the thing that kind of surprised me from this chapter was you talk about spiritual disciplines as a way to construct places of restoration. I don't know that I was expecting to find that in the book. Talk to us a little bit about that, because one thing I can't say, and I actually have a close friend who just lost his wife like a week and a half ago that I've been talking to, and he's just disoriented. There's no structure, and we're just kind of talking through what I experience is just so he can, because he just wants to talk to somebody who understands what he's going through. But in terms of spiritual disciplines as a way to start building a framework for restoration, like what can that look like?
Well, it can look like a struggle to begin with, truth be told. That's going to be honest about that. I mean, you're talking about discipline, which is something that's very orderly at a time when you're, as we were just talking about, your life feels very disorderly.
I
So it
think
can feel as
you said in the book you talk about that you lost your passion for just about everything. At least that's how you felt. I don't know how you can't not feel like that in the moment.
exactly. I did. I did. I just, I mean, like I said, I didn't want to go on. I laid in the bed wanting to not go on. And so I did. I lost all of my passion. And when I say that, I want to say that um, when you're grieving and you don't want to go on, it's more a desire to be with the person who has gone on than it is a desire to end your life. It's a desire for connection with the person that you love. And so I just wanted to be clear about that. But yeah, we're struggling. And for me, it was a loss of passion across the board. I struggle to pray, and I struggle to pray in part because I prayed with my husband first thing. We had developed a routine where he would get up first. He would spend his time alone with God. He would wake me up before going to work. We would pray together, and then I would spend my time alone with God. And so I had developed this for me out of this routine. My first encounter with God every morning after I got married was in unity with my husband. And so now, with him being torn from me, every morning when I first woke up, I was reminded immediately. I didn't have that reprieve that some women, or not just women, people who are experiencing loss sometimes talk about before they realize, oh, this person is gone. It was immediate for me every morning because I had developed this routine of prayer. Because of that, the spiritual discipline of prayer was a struggle for me that I needed to re-engage in, but I didn't have to re-engage in it immediately. I could re-engage in some of the other disciplines. And for this season of my life, the discipline that I chose to engage in was Sabbath, was rest. That there is a spiritual discipline of rest that helps us heal. And so it's okay. So like a lot of people are like, oh, if I'm going through a season and I'm not praying or I'm not reading the Bible, I'm a bad Christian. No, there are other spiritual disciplines you can engage in. Sabbath was at the top of my list. Once I could, journaling, I re-engaged with that and just sharing my pain, just writing about what I was feeling. And if you don't feel like sharing your pain because, hey, I told you, I got to a point where I was like, hey, I don't want to hurt anymore. I just journaled about what's going on in my life, right? Oh, I need to go to the grocery store, right? Oh, I'm going to go visit my mother today, right? Oh, these kinds of things. And I'm someone who prays, who journals my prayers. And so part of my journaling was prayers for other people because though I struggled to pray for myself, when other people requested prayer, that was a way I could engage in the spiritual discipline of prayer without it hurting the way it did when I tried to pray for myself because I had no idea what to pray for during that season for me. But when someone tells you, hey, my mom's sick, can you pray for her? Yes, I can. I can pray for your mom. I can't pray for me, but I can pray for your mom. Can you pray for, um, a financial breakthrough? I'm struggling financially. Yes, I can pray for God to bless you financially. Right. So, yeah, that's how some of these disciplines can look in your life during that time. And it's a way for you to stay connected with God without consciously trying to stay connected to Him, because during this season, it can be hard to consciously try to stay connected to Him.
Well, I like that you brought up journaling. Journaling's been really helpful for me. So you're either a journaler or you're not, but I can say what I've found helpful is it's really given me a place to bring order to my thoughts in just the midst of, again, as we've talked about, it can feel very chaotic. So and some days things can feel very orderly, and a different day they just feel completely chaotic. It kind of ebbs and flows. And then just in turn, I like also what you said. That you would pray with your husband, and then you had to step into something different practice wise, just because it was hard, because you lost something that was really precious. But I've found too, just whatever that is, sometimes you're so frustrated because there's no momentum. Things move so slow as you're recovering and as you're grieving. For me, that's been I go for walks every morning, and that's where I pray and talk to God. And I put on hundreds of miles in the last 5.5 months. But just finding some kind of a new practice, a rhythm, a new pattern, something that when you get out of bed in the morning, you do A, B, C, whatever that is, just to get movement. Because again, like you described, sometimes you just rather lay in bed for 3 days because what's the point, kind of a thing. And so, don't take the disciplines as like a stressful thing. Figure out what that can be for you in a way that you can just build that into the daily rhythm of your life. But something that's going to get you out of the bed in the morning is extremely helpful. Goodness, we've got a million other directions we could go, but we got to wrap up pretty soon. You talk about shining your light at the right time, like just in terms of moving, stepping into other things. Like, how do we discern what the right time is? Because on the one hand, I feel like as we go through stages of grief, we'll feel really great. Because I don't know. For me, like 4 months out, I thought I'd had a lot figured out, and then as I stepped into month 5, I was like, oh wow, I got so much more to keep going with. How do we discern? Maybe and maybe that can look like different things in different areas where we're ready to step out more in one area, but there's other things God's still got a lot of healing left for us. So how do we discern what's the right time to get back out there and let our light shine?
Um, Areas of favor, right? And another way of saying that is doors that open, right? And so a lot of times in life, and I'll just speak about my life, we try to go through doors that aren't open, or we try to open doors on our own. And during the grieving season and the rebuilding season, I think that it's um, paramount that we try to see the doors that are opened and go through those doors, right? And that's what I mean by signs, that God will open up doors along the way. An invitation, right, to go do something is a door. Um, a phone call might be a door, right? The ability to do something now that you weren't able to do before, like I was saying, pray is a door. There are lots of different doors that open in our lives, or open over the course of our lives. They don't all have to be um, great big doors, like you were saying, but they can be once you're ready. And the step actually right before that talks about preparation, that and those are the kind of doors that you can go through too, right? So like if you've always wanted to take a cooking course and a cooking course is being offered right now, take the cooking course right now, right? Because that's an opportunity to do something. It's an opportunity to move forward in your life and build new routines, like we were talking about before, without the person who, is the object of our affections, who we have lost, because that's the path that we're struggling in. So when we're opening up new doors, for me, it was a new job, right? I got offered a new job, and it was like, oh, and so I had been working in ministry with my husband, and now I was working by myself again. And I was able to develop confidence around doing that again, right? Because I was like, oh, I'm out here working and making money and getting up every day and coming home every day and just going through that routine, but seeing that I can do that again all by myself. I don't have to be connected to do that. It was great to be connected and do that. I'm not trying to minimize that in any way. I'm just saying it's not necessary. And when we've had these routines, like waking up in the morning and praying with my husband first thing in the morning, it takes us a minute to realize that that's not necessary for us to move forward. And these doors that open nudge us forward, and they nudge us forward without struggle that some of these other things um, present and that we're not ready for yet.
Yeah, that's helpful to talk about going where there's favor and open doors. And again, I've read a lot of books, listened to a lot of podcasts, people talking about how they grieved their losing their spouse. And on the one hand, I feel like there's the ditch of wanting to complete and finish all of your spouse's everything. Some people can get stuck on that. I feel like another ditch is trying to force open doors that maybe are more appropriate several years down the road, as opposed to just now. Really, and I would say this is something you can pray about is saying, God, give me discernment to walk through the right doors and see the doors you're actually opening, not just what I want to see. Is just we're such an emotional mess. We can just want to see what we want to see, and God might be moving someplace completely different. Also, love what you talked about. If you always take a cooking course, go take that cooking course. Um, and this is something I don't think people can understand until they get into this space. But your relationships change. Like how you relate to other people in the church, in your community, everywhere. It was always you and your spouse to a large degree. And so once you're single again, how everybody relates to you shifts. And so you're going to have to, some of those relationships will stay, others will fade away. And you're going to have to intentionally build new community. And that may come out of places you've never been before. So I really like that idea of just putting yourself out there to makes at least hopefully a new friend, but maybe some new acquaintances, because you're going to need community somewhere. And just again, the friend I was talking to last night, for him, he's in a place where it's hard to be in places where him and his wife had community still because it's so new. And I encourage him like once you get further down the road, those places are going to be a blessing to you. So for him, he's in a season of just finding new community outside of what was his old normal. But community is really, really important because you're going to feel pretty lonely, especially in the early days of that journey. I think the place I'd love to wrap up is just have you kind of talk about in terms of like reader's journey with the book. Again, we haven't covered all of the content. There's so much more we could have talked about from the book, but somebody gets to that last page, they've spent the time, they've answered all the questions and thought through everything you asked them to think through at the end of each chapter. Like, what's that impact, that takeaway? How do you hope you're able to shift each reader along their journey with the book?
That rebuilding is a cycle, right? That we are constantly rebuilding. Um, God is always doing a new thing in some area of the world or our lives. And being comfortable with the fact that we're going to, at some point, find ourselves in another um, chaotic, empty, dark situation. It may not be as chaotic. It may not be as empty. It may not be as dark. And I pray that it's not. Right? I really do pray that it's not, but there's going to be another thing because this is how God creates, right? And he starts with tearing stuff down. And shared with me that that's because the structures and processes and systems and all of those different things that we had built in our lives were for the previous season. Like you said, we were operating as a couple before. And so our relationships with other people, because we were one with this other person, will all change now that we're operating as a single individual again. Right. And so all of those systems and structures and things that we had developed for that moment in our lives, that season in our lives when we were joined with that thing that object of our affection, right? That person will not go into this next season. And if we do, right, hold on to them and refuse to let go of them, they're not going to serve us. in this new season. And that's part of the struggle that we go through is that, I talk about, hanging on to my husband and trying to hold on to God at the same time and being torn between these two, but I had to let go if I was going to move forward because my husband was no longer a part of my life and the vision God had for me. And so, yeah, we these systems and processes were for yesterday, not tomorrow. And we need to start building new things for today and tomorrow.
Well, and that's so helpful in the sense of, and again, I've learned this on my own journey, is there are a lot of things we really have to frame and reframe to keep our mind in a good space. And I really like that analogy. And this is how I've described my own journey to people is I feel like even along the grief path, as I've felt like I was crushed and kind of broken down to a foundation level, at the same time, there's also been a journey of God partnering with me to rebuild and step into what this new season is. So there's a tearing down and a saying goodbye to what was, and then there's building something new on that foundation, and that's okay. But it's super important, really, to I feel like have some of these analogies or ways that, on the one hand, I think to think rightly, but even as we're trying to express ourselves to others, to be able to describe that to somebody, it's helpful because there's a lot of ways you just don't feel understood by the outside world in this journey. So just being able to, and maybe this is where journaling would be a big help, but just to be able to communicate what's going on like that, and I feel like kind of helps you to stay sane. So, but yeah. Whatever analogies work for you, pray that God would allow you to be able to express yourself like that because I've found that to be really helpful. Don, in terms of people connecting with you, finding out more, all the things, where's the best place for us to discover you on the web?
Oh, and my website, dawnmansanders.com. And when you visit, you'll find my new quiz. It's called What is Your Starting Over Type? And what it does is it gives you 5 sets of results. And after you fill out the questions, you will find out which of the result types you are. It'll describe that to you, but it will also give you 3 action steps based on your type that will help nudge you forward today.
And we'll make it easy like we do with every episode. We'll have links in the description and the show notes to Dawn's website, as well as links to places where you can pick up your very own copy of her brand new book. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Dawn Mann Sanders. Once again, our book today was When Your World Ends, God's Creative Process for Rebuilding a Life. And Dawn, I want to say thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you. The pleasure was mine.